So my teapot is now ready to have its spout and handle attached. So I have my spout from yesterday here that's nice and leather hard. Haven't really done anything else to it since then. I also have the handle that I demoed earlier today, and I hit that with the heat gun so it's stiffened up a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is just get kind of on eye level with my teapot and think about the way this thing is going to work when it's filled up with liquid. So when thinking about where I want to put my spout, I'm going to try to hold this at an angle to where you can see it. A lot of people make the mistake early on of putting their spout on kind of in the middle of the teapot, or they try to put it on the bottom and have it curve up. But the important thing you remember is that when this is full of liquid, unless you want it to spill out your spout, you have to make sure your spout is as high, if not higher, than the maximum fill line inside, which is where your gallery comes down to. So I'm thinking somebody could fill my teapot to about there, and as a result, I really need this spout to be angled up quite a bit, and I also want it to be placed fairly high up on my teapot. If I were to have it come out of the bottom or this midsection, I'd need a much longer spout than what I've made. So, you know, this is another good reason why it's always nice to have a little bit of a plan before you just set out and start working, because, you know, the shape you're trying to make is really something ideally you have in mind early on. I didn't do that because this is probably the 100th teapot I've made, and over the years I've developed kind of a set of proportions and a set style. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my spout kind of in this area, and I'm going to get down to where I can see my spout, but I'm going to hold it just past my teapot body. I'm hoping that turns up okay in the video, but basically what I'm trying to do is get it to where I can see the way my teapot would look with that spout attached by holding it behind there a little bit. And then I'm going to reach in with the needle tool. I'm going to mark it. And ultimately, I think I'm going to end up cutting this at somewhat of an angle, where this side's going to be cut a little higher, and then down by here it's going to come lower. So one thing I like to do to make my cutting mark nice and even is I kind of mark the bottom and the top, and I think about how far up this is coming. And sometimes instead of trying to trace a straight line across, I'll use a flat wooden knife or something like that to just roll across it and kind of connect the dots. That way I can draw a straight line a little easier. So here's the bottom, here's the top, and this is starting to angle as I cut it. So now that I have an idea of where I want that, I'm going to come in with my knife. I'm going to go ahead and cut that extra clay off my teapot. And when I use my knife, I'm always being real careful to cut at a perpendicular angle so I don't end up with a funny cut line. Let me come in here and just clean this up a little bit. And I'm going to put a little thumbnail mark at the bottom just so I can keep track of it. And then I can hold this on and see how it's fitting. I like that quite a bit. I think that's going to be a nice fit on that teapot. You may need to whittle this a little bit if it's not making really nice contact with the sides. You are putting it on a rounded form, so if needed you can always come in and shave a little off here and there just to make sure it's really going to line up right. You don't want to look at it from the side and see a big gap. You may also, depending on how thick your teapot is, you may need to bevel this interior edge just a little bit so that it really sits up flat against your teapot. This is not a real thick spout, so I don't have a whole lot of beveling work to do. That looks good. So now that I have that where I want it, I'm going to line it up And I'm going to come in with my needle tool and trace where I want the spout to go. And then I'm going to take my spout off and think about what I want to do to create a hole here. So I could just come in with my knife and cut a big circle. If I did that, I'd want to cut inside this line a little bit because I do need some overlap space for that spout to connect. So I would probably cut about there. However, your other option is to just drill holes instead, because if you drill holes, you can create a little bit of a strainer. And if you're using this teapot with loose leaf tea, especially a larger loose leaf tea like full green tea leaves, then this will actually make it to where you don't even need to use a strainer. So this will take me a couple minutes. I'm using kind of a, looks like this is a 1/4 inch drill bit. I probably could go a little smaller here, but my concern is that this is going to shrink 12%, and if I do too small of a drill bit, it becomes really easy to accidentally clog the holes I make with glaze when I'm glazing this. So I want to err on the side of just a little bit bigger holes than I need. So I'm twisting this drill bit by hand and just slowly working it through. And I'm just kind of winging the way that these holes are spaced, but I am keeping them far enough away from the edges to where I'm not in danger of interfering with my overlap for the attachment. A couple other things I'll say while you wait for me to do this part, because it takes a minute. You notice I did already start doing a little bit of decoration work on the top of my teapot. Here's what the lid's looking like right now. It's pretty sweet. I went ahead and did that part. Normally I leave my decoration for the very end, but because I've been making this handle for a while, I know, or not this handle, this teapot, I know that after I attach the handle and the spout, there's going to be things placed up close enough to that sort of collar I've created to where it does make it really difficult to get in and decorate that part later. So I've learned over the years it's better for me to do that sooner. And to make those lines, I did not carve them. Instead, I pushed them in using the blade of this wooden knife. Or sometimes I use this tool, which is designed for cake decorating. It's a fondant cutter, and I'll just roll that up wherever I want the line. All of my work normally is carved. I research historic textiles from India for the inspiration for the patterns I carve into the pots. And that step will be the very last thing I do after all the parts are assembled, and this is a really nice stiff leather hard. So, you know, that just is kind of explaining why I break that rule of doing most of my decoration work at the end for these lines. Okay, I'm down to my last hole, which is good because my hand's starting to cramp up a little bit. There we go. And there's what that looks like. Again, there with the needle tool, and make sure all those holes are nice and clear. I don't want to have any little shavings in there. You might have to get in with the tool and brush off the inside. If you're using that drill bit and the parts that you're shaving off as you drill those holes, if they're not really falling off, it's just like trimming. That means that this pot's a little too wet. So they should just fall off the way mine did. The other thing to keep in mind is that you do need enough holes here to make sure that all in total, the amount of opening here is bigger than the small end of your spout. Otherwise, you're going to get that glug, glug, glug problem when you go to pour. So I think this is ready to be slipped and scored. So I have some slip. I'm going to go ahead and get that in place. Try not to get too far outside of my attachment area. And then I'll get my spout all slipped up. That is great. And I have my scoring tool here. This is just a little wire rake. I'm scoring this a lot of different directions. I'm a very thorough scorer. I'm also a big fan of slipping and then scoring. I know people who do it the other way, but I like slipping first and then scoring just because you can kind of work that moisture in the slip into the clay and create even a little bit more slip as you go too. Okay, so I'm ready to attach this spout, and there's my mark of where the bottom goes. I'm looking at this kind of straight on. I'm going to give it a little push and twist, a little wiggle. I roll my finger around the edge to make sure that the edges are sealing. And then I'm going to do my favorite cleanup trick, which involves coming in with a paintbrush that is just a little damp. And I'm just wiping that seam. I like doing this with the paintbrush for two reasons. The first is that it does wipe all my extra slip off and it smooths that area if I happen to accidentally get a little bit of my scoring outside the lines. But the other thing it does is it provides some compression. And I believe I was mentioning earlier how much this clay that's half porcelain loves to be compressed. It's one of the best things you can do whenever you join two pieces of clay together. It's just really push on them, and that paintbrush helps a lot. So I'm coming over this one more time with a damp sponge. That looks great. So my spout is on. Now I'm ready to get my handle attached as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put my lid on just so I can see this whole thing together. I like thinking about how high up that knob sticks up. And my handle needs a little cleanup work, but before I spend too much time on that, I'm going to figure out where I want this attached. So I like to attach my handle the same way I attach my spout, where I kind of hold the handle behind the teapot and I look at the way they overlap and I play with that profile a little bit. I'm also thinking about the way my hand's going to come in when I grab this. My hand's going to be like this, so it would be really nice if most of my handle is oriented up and down, versus if it's at a real steep angle, my hand's going to slide a little bit when I go to grab it. There are people who do teapot handles that go up over the top. There are also people who just make little clay loops and then they attach handles that are made of other materials like wood or wire. But I like a nice clay handle. So I think I figured out about where I want this to go. I'm going to go ahead and mark my handle. So I'm not sure how well you can see what I'm doing, but my plan is for the handle to spring off this top shoulder, go up, and then attach just below this widest point. So I'm going to slide my teapot up for a second, come in with my knife and go ahead and slice the extra parts of this off. And you notice this isn't a straight cut. This is cut at an angle because it's attaching to a curved part of my teapot body. So I'm doing my initial cut, and I'm going to do just a little bit of touch-up work here, since it looks like I cut at a little bit of a funny angle. Okay. So let's see how that's looking. Pull this back up. So that's close, but looks like I need to angle this bottom, up a little bit more. So I'm going to do a little revised cut down there. better? Oh, that's so much better. So you can see now that's really hugging the body of my teapot. And at this point, I'm going to go in and do a little bit of just detail work on my handle. I really love my handle to come to a little bit of a point at the bottom. That's just an aesthetic decision. It's not like that really changes the functionality at all. So I'm going to point that. And I'm going to go in and pinch the edges of this just to start softening it. I also like just the tip of that point to curl up just a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing to the top of my handle. Hold this up in just a minute so you can see what I've done here. And I'm really smoothing out those connection places so that this handle really is almost perfect by the time I put it on my teapot. And that's because after this is attached, I just don't want to be messing with it a lot. I want it to be pretty much ready to go. Okay, so one more little tweak on the top of this. There we go. Okay, so there's the top of my handle. And the bottom. Holding it up one more time. That looks good to me. And now I'm going to look at my handle straight on. And this is so that I can be positive that my attachment here is straight across from my spout. And when looking at that, I actually notice I want this to come up just a little bit higher. I want to expand where the top of this is touching the teapot. So I'm just whittling away at this to re-angle it just a smidge. I took a little bit more off the top. There we go. I like that a lot more. Okay, so I have that straight across. And now I'm tracing both my connections. Okay, so I'm slipping and scoring. While I do this, I'll mention that I also think it's a really good idea for you to make more handles and spouts than you need when you are making these teapots, because you never know, first of all, if you're going to accidentally drop a handle or a spout. But beyond that, especially early on while you're still working on your first couple of teapots, you may not really have a good sense of the type of proportions you want on your form. And having a couple different spout options is really helpful. You might end up realizing you like the slightly shorter spout, or maybe you need one that is a little wider just to really suit the form. Since I'm a production potter, where I make my living off selling my work, I usually make more than one piece at a time. So I don't know if you noticed in the background here, I actually have multiple other spouts because I have 2 other teapots in the works. And it's nice having those other spouts because I can play a little bit with which spout goes on which piece. All right, I'm going to take the lid off so I can reach down inside, because I also really want to apply a lot of pressure. I'm actually going to stand up when I do this, because I want to push. I want to give this a little wiggle. Go ahead and do the same thing on the bottom here. And you can see all the extra slip squirting out. And then I'm going to look at this straight on again. Make sure that this hasn't slid to the right or the left, which it had. Need a little tweak. Looking at this straight on from further back, making sure I'm straight up and down. There's nothing worse than getting your handle on and realizing that it is not actually lined up right. And now that I have that in place, I'm coming in with my paintbrush and doing another round of smoothing, getting all that slip off, but also compressing that joint. And you'll probably already know this trick, but I always think it's a good idea whenever you join clay to clay, if possible, to let the piece set up overnight under plastic before you leave it out to air dry. And that's just because no matter how hard you try to get your handle and your spout and your teapot all at the same wet or dryness before you make all these attachments, there's always going to be one part that's just a little drier or a little wetter than the rest. So this is just a safety measure to give them time to acclimate and all kind of even out before you let them air dry and start to really do their final shrinking before the bisque kiln. All right, last but not least, I am smoothing the edges of this just a little bit with a sponge. And come in and get a couple fingerprints off the inside of this with the paintbrush, since I can't get my sponge in there. And here's my lid again. Getting other fingerprints off that I may have created. Is done. So, whoops, one little spot needs touched up here. There we go. There is the finished teapot. After this, I will probably come in and do the surface design I mentioned. I'll carve patterns into it. I also sometimes come in later and trim this spout just to angle it so it ends up shaving off the top part of this. I haven't decided if I'll do that on this teapot or not. I kind of like it how it is. But there you have it. How to make a teapot. Thanks for watching.